through and say, okay, the impact on the freight flows and what might we do about it in order to gain some competitive advantage. From a freight flows perspective, this is the Transport Intelligence Global Freight Forwarding Report 2017, released, I think it was in June or July of this year. This confirms what I've said, is that the three major trading regions are the largest freight. They measure freight forwarding revenue by the export basis. Okay. It's currently a $142 billion market globally. It's about 50-50 between air and ocean freight. It's growing at 4%, and in 2020 it'll be $167 billion. This is the key thing. This is the trade flows, and therefore a correlation to freight flows. Trade flows of goods in 2016. More than half of it is intra-region. We can see again here our three regions. Within Europe, within Asia, and within North America. Intra-regional trade flows, more than half the total trade flows. And when we map this back to a dollar perspective and put it on a map, this is how it looks. This is a good one for you to have when you download the PDF file, because it gives you the inter-regional trade flows as well as the intra-regional trade flows. So a huge surge towards this regionalisation. Just for your interest, I extracted from the report a couple of charts. Again, you could study this when you get the presentation, that look at, this is air freight 2016. This is the top 20 air freight providers by volume, according to the Transport Intelligence Report. Top 20 have just over half of the total market and just over half of the revenue. You can see who they are. This is growing at just under 4%. It'll be an $86 billion global air freight market in 2020. Similar chart for sea freight, and a lot of the names on the bottom are different. Some of the positions are slightly changed. This is about a $70 billion market at the moment globally, growing to $80 billion plus in 2020. Top 20 global share by volume in TEU with their percentage shares. In the ocean freight, the top 20 manage about 2/3 of the volume and just over 60% of the revenue. So that's from the freight forwarding and freight flows perspective. So to wrap it all up, what does this mean? This trend toward regionalisation. Well, I think there's three key things. Fewer miles, more moves, and modal shifts. When we concatenate the distance, the speed and time parameters change. So when we're going transatlantic or trans-Pacific, we're talking of a speed differential of air freight versus ocean freight that is measured in weeks, right? So typically it'd be 2 to 3 weeks longer by sea freight than by air freight. When we bring that down to intra-regional trade, we're talking maybe a few days. The difference between the air freight and the sea freight, maybe just a few days. So regional trade means shorter routes, and the differential of the speed advantage of air versus ocean becomes a different discussion. So fewer miles is a big impact. Secondly, more moves. This research showed, this was from Stifel, this research showed that when product was offshored, so let's say it's made in Asia, you bring it into Europe. Once it comes into Europe, domestically within Europe, it will be touched between 2 and 3 times before it gets to final destination. What the Stifel research found was that if you onshore that product, which is an increasing trend, there's a multiple of 4 in terms of the trade movements, the freight movements. So if it's made all within Europe, generally speaking, the freight will be touched domestically within Europe 8 to 12 times, 4 times as much as if it was offshore. So the distance will be shorter, but the number of moves will increase with the regionalisation trend. And the third thing I think we're going to see is this modal shift. Modal shift. When we're looking at long-haul freight flows, for example, the transatlantic, the trans-Pacific, we're talking about long distance, we're talking about big oceans. I don't think there's going to be much modal shift here, other than what's normally been happening. Generally, it's a single move from an origin port to a destination port. You've got to clear customs at export, clear customs at import, one at each end. Relatively straightforward. Highly competitive and quite brutal for some of the carriers in recent years.